Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live from the Copeland Coaching offices with me today is Austin Baker. Austin is the president and chairman of the board at his company, HRO Partners. HRO Partners is a human resource consulting and outsourcing company. They become the HR department for companies that don't have one and provide more horsepower to companies that do. Austin, thanks for joining me today.
Really happy to be here, Angela. Thanks for having me.
It's so nice to finally get a chance to sit down and chat with you. I think our industries overlap quite a bit, and I think we both get asked some common questions. So first, I'd love to talk a little bit about your company, HRO Partners, and I'd love it if you could share with us a little bit about what it is for those who haven't heard of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We work with a variety of consultants that want to be in business for themselves but not by themselves. We provide them an outstanding platform to be able to conduct their HR consulting services. We connect them with tools, industry-leading reports that cost thousands of dollars, technology, and best practices, as well as a team of people that are specialists in any number of areas. And so for a person that wants to be in the HR consulting business, what we developed is a platform for them to be able to launch into that. They can use our brand, they can use our resources, and almost be kind of like an Uber for HR consulting.
Oh, that's cool. So are most of the businesses that you work with, are they like medium-sized businesses? What is it, a range?
We have a range, and we have the nonprofit organizations that are 45 to 1,000. We have government entities that are 15,000 plus. We have Fortune 500 industries that are 60 or 70,000 employees, and so really depending on the engagement and the client, we have very scalable solutions that we can offer via our technology and back office resources that can save companies millions of dollars and bring them things that are going to help them grow exponentially.
That's great. I mean, I think as a small business owner, one of the hardest things is actually, having to reach outside what you're actually good at to do these other parts of the business like HR. But the thing that's really helpful today is that you're going to bring this great HR sort of knowledge to our job seeker base that's listening.
Sure.
So I'm curious, from your perspective, how did you get into the business of HR?
Well, the first business that I formed, I was a sophomore in college, 18 years old. I started to build a company, and that's the last time anyone else wrote me a paycheck. I was an entrepreneur from that point forward, and I had some very small paychecks and some very, very rewarding paychecks. But my first company was an employee benefit brokerage, a consulting firm. I built into 25 states and sold after 10 years in business and launched my HRO Partners brand out of that to peel off some of the services and provide a more holistic and different game-changing approach for other benefit brokers to partner with us, and also with individuals and consultants to work with us in a new way. So we were looking to be, disruptive in the HR space, to approach it in a different way, and to help organizations advance their people strategies faster than they ever thought they could.
Oh, that's great. So at 18, you started it. Or you started your first business. Mm-hmm. That's kind of unusual. What gave you the idea at 18 to start a business?
My dad was working in an organization that needed an individual, some people to come on and help them sell as a 1099 contractor, and I started kind of that way, and started on my own. I did it for about a year, and 18, just about turning 19, I decided to go out on my own, and he helped me kind of start to build my own practice, and the rest is history.
Oh, that's awesome. So I'm curious, at a typical corporation, we hear HR, it's kind of vague for a lot of us who haven't worked in HR. It doesn't, I don't know exactly what it means sometimes when I hear that. What does it typically encompass at a company?
I think that many smaller, mid-sized organizations might think of HR differently than certainly a large enterprise-level organization. Most often, payroll gets lumped into it. Really, in fact, payroll is an accounting function. If you don't pay people right and on time, it becomes an HR issue. Setting compensation strategy, that's definitely an HR area. Training, development, onboarding, recruiting, selection, your succession planning, the way that your organization is designed what kind of career pathways are in it. Your overall philosophy and strategy in your culture needs to be implemented, usually alongside and through HR to get the right managers and to get the right people on board. And so it starts to really balloon outside of that. I mean, I've had an organization that said, we've got to move our offices, and HR has been put in charge of all the logistics for the move. So they had to do that on top of their day-to-day, figure out how to logistically move their office and turn it into a logistics operation. I've had other organizations that say, our HR department reports to our CFO, and so it's really about the numbers and blocking and tackling of HR, about getting, and controlling cost. And other organizations don't look at it as a cost center; they look at it as a revenue center and a growth opportunity. So you hear of so many different things and flavors. I've got people that just want to outsource it lock, stock, and barrel, that are done with it because they don't understand it and they've never seen it work well. We believe that there are a lot of approaches that can improve HR and help to grow organizations. You just have to meet people where they are as an organization. You have to figure out what are the best next steps and then figure out where to take them from there so they can survive and thrive in today's economy.
So did you say that some companies assign HR to another department, like the chief financial officer?
Yeah, we've seen it on a regular basis. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, so I've talked to a lot of job seekers lately who are really interested to get into human resources, and they're very excited, and they go for these sort of informational interviews where they meet with people at various companies that have done HR and have experience in HR. And sometimes they get the feedback like, this is just too hard, or you don't have an HR degree or something like that. So I'm curious, from your perspective, if someone is interested to get into HR, what could they do? What would you recommend that they do if they've never worked in HR before?
I think that most of the successful things I've done in my life, I've just gone and done, and asked questions sometimes after the fact, or discounted some levels of advice and taken others. So you're going to get mixed feedback wherever you go. We run into HR people who are disenchanted, and are discouraged because of the number of things that have been put on top of them. So their perspective and lens about HR right now is that it's overwhelming, it's too much, and it's more than it should be, especially in the regulatory environment that we're in now. I mean, the number of things that an organization needs to be protected from, that HR has to regulate, rule, or work around, has just certainly grown. And so, but you have multiple areas of HR, and you have a lot of entry points, So if you are a great numbers person, you enjoy compensation, that's one of the most rewarding areas of HR, is in compensation design and philosophy. If you were, a great employee relations person, you have employee relations pathways. If you're that inspiring trainer that wants to work in training, you can go in a training side. Or if you want to really be a generalist and say, I'd like to learn enough to be able to know how to operate an HR department or operate and do multiple functions in a small organization where I'll need to sometimes put on the training hat and sometimes put on this hat, or find a partner to outsource X to, then I want to go that way. So there's a lot of ways you can go about getting into HR, and going to get those certifications and getting that first level of experience is certainly where the challenging thing is. But there's great organization in town where you can get exposed to some of that, and there's an endless number of blogs and resources where you can read as much as you please about HR practices.
Yeah, so it sounds like if maybe our college degree is in some other area that's not HR, do we need to consider getting a new 4-year degree, or, how important is that?
Some people value that more than others. Some places offered more, organizational design, IO psychology. I see that, peeled into HR. I see just basic management, with a specialty in some employee relations or something going into there as well. But really, HR certifications that are out there are probably some of the biggest things that are looked at. Getting certification as a PHR, SPHR. They have these new ones for CCPs and things like that. You can get certified recruiting types of things. So there's a variety of those stepping stone certifications that don't have to bite off on a 4-year. Some of them do, certainly at certain levels, require so much experience on the ground as well.
Yeah, and how long does it typically take to get one of those certifications? Is there a range, or does it vary?
The classes are offered regularly. If you search, you can find them offered through the SHRM SHRM Memphis organization here. Cynthia Thompson has her own set of classes that are well known. I believe that Union University offers some, as well as Christian Brothers from a certification standpoint. So they're fairly easy to find, and some are online, some classroom.
Yeah, okay. And that actually brings up a good point. So you mentioned SHRM, and I'd love to, it's here in Memphis, but SHRM is also national, is that right? It's a quite a big organization.
Oh, no doubt. The Society for Human Resource Management is probably one of the largest HR organizations out there, and they are national. Other types of HR organizations specialize. You've got some that are IPMA, which is a public sector version of SHRM. You have that's a fairly sizable, not nearly the size of SHRM. Certainly, you have World at Work, which is designed for many of the comp people out there. You have those people that affiliate with that group. You have some HR technology industry, LinkedIn slash, really, I guess, they have these technology groups, and they're almost subsets, but you can go to technology-only conferences. So if you love tech, you love people management, and you want to be an HR tech specialist, you can do extremely well in an HRIS environment, helping to configure and build those type of things, and you may be working with HR or IT or a combination of the two. So there's so many different kind of affiliation groups that you can really go with.
So those are separate from SHRM as opposed to sort of like a subset of SHRM?
SHRM has some subsets in that area, but
Okay.
those are just other options as well. So just
that's
there's a pretty
interesting.
vast landscape.
And I'm curious, you may or may not know this, but I've recommended sometimes that people go to SHRM events who are interested in getting into HR. Can just anyone go to these events, or do you have to already be working in HR to maybe get involved in SHRM?
No, by all means, they're open to guests. There's a LinkedIn group for SHRM Memphis here in the Memphis area, as well as for national. There's, they always have guest registration available for people that want to drop in. And, I would say just if you have a networking type of card and you're, going into that area, drop in and visit with a few people, tell them what you're trying to do, and show up a few times, maybe volunteer, to work the door at the registration. Not a better way to meet everybody than to register them all.
That's true.
You'll know everybody's name that's there. You'll know their positions. You'll know their companies. And when you're done with registration, you can get up and sit by one of them and say, hey, this is why I'm here, and this is why I'm volunteering. I'm spending my time to learn and to give back to your industry so I can find a way inside. Would you have any advice for me? You'd be surprised. That goes a long way.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. So one thing that oftentimes is suggested to us as job seekers is when we're looking for a job is that we should go apply online. And essentially we upload our resume onto the company website through this applicant tracking system. Do you recommend that we do that? What are your thoughts on that process?
Applicant tracking systems all certainly have their own nuances. Even with applicant tracking systems, I believe in online job search and those kind of things, you may have to still be into those portals. But at the end of the day, I think still some 70-80% of jobs are found via relationships and referrals. And so it's as much about working with your LinkedIn and other contacts to get individuals to help pull you out of the pile and put you in front of the right people.
Yeah, I really like that. I think it's important to apply online. You want to be sure you've told that company that you did it because they asked you to.
Oh, absolutely.
But I've met job seekers who've applied to 100 jobs online, and it was the one person they reached out to in person that actually hired them, as opposed to those 100, online. So I would guess, when you hire, I know that you post jobs online, but I would guess that if you had someone that you knew of and you knew they were good, there would be some level of weight that would go with that, as opposed to just these random resumes that you get on the internet. I don't know. Would that be fair? I don't know.
No, I think that's right. I think that spending your time, especially with that many, applications, you have to have a more structured approach, in my opinion, than just the only applications online.
Yeah.
If you haven't found a way to network and meet people and found groups to go to, you're never going to be able to find your way into organizations. And that's where you find all the candid conversations about what it's like to work there and those kind of things too. So, I believe your network is equal to your net worth, and if you want to be a person that understands how to build a Rolodex virtually with LinkedIn and personally, you're going to be more successful wherever you decide to go.
I completely agree. Well, so one really interesting thing I noticed, this is actually on your LinkedIn, speaking of LinkedIn, your company helps other companies attract, retain, and engage A players. And I know this is a big issue. I was actually asked to come and speak to hiring managers last year about this issue. There was a group of frustrated hiring managers that were feeling upset. And anyway, I'm curious, what kinds of things do you help companies do that would help them to attract and retain these A players, and why do you think A players tend to leave?
We actually use a top grading approach to do this.
Yeah.
From the book, there's a very large volume called Top Grading.
I have it in my office.
That one's a manual for sure. There's another one that's more distilled called Who, that's a much more palatable version for the daily practitioner. But we have a very structured way of identifying A players, the characteristics and traits and things, to help an organization really profile what's going to make a person successful in that job. Job descriptions often get fairly generic and have to be in some respects because it's being used and benchmarked against other, from a job analysis standpoint. But at the end of the day, in terms of what would make that person successful, do you have a job scorecard? Do you have a profile of what the first 90 days would look like that would make that person successful? Do you have an onboarding program that's designed to engage and help them build relationships in the organization? What's their first day look like? Do they even have a desk or cards or a computer? Has anyone been assigned to grab them and pull them into lunch with the normal crew that goes? Or have you brought them in and set them down and told them you'll get with them when you can, which happens as well. So if you want A players and you want to work with them, everything from the way that you do your interviews and selection to the way you say no to a candidate to the way they come in, needs to be reflective of that kind of best practice and rigor. And we went through some hiring recently, and it took us over 2.5 months on this one position just to find the right one. And, sometimes these things take time. But beyond that, if you're not giving regular feedback to an A player and showing them how they grow with your organization, you're probably not going to keep them in today's market. Talent is scarce and labor is abundant, and organizations that understand that and have a real high potential A player type of pathway program are going to retain a higher percentage. But you can't forget about all your B players while you're doing that too. There's plenty of folks that could be even better with more engagement, training, and time. So make sure that you're not being exclusive, that you're lifting while you're climbing.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I think, I've gone through the top grading interview process myself. It's a lot of work. It's more work, I would say, both on the company and on the interviewer. But it's a great process. Do you find, a lot of companies, I bet you're introducing the idea of top grading to them for the first time. Are they ever hesitant given how much commitment that is to really, they really have to think differently a little bit to do that process?
No doubt. A lot of organizations will default to purchasing that technology solution to help them sort through resumes better or, incorporate video interviewing or whatever they're deciding to do, but without a commitment to improve their process, help their hiring managers get really good at doing this, and distill in the parts of the top grading that make sense for them. They're not usually ever going to get the results they need. Yeah.
It's really interesting, too. You talked about sort of your first day, and do you have the computer? Do you have business cards? Like, how do you bring someone in? There's a job I had in the past where, so first of all, not only were they not really prepared for me to start, I think, but on I think it was my first day, my boss let me know that he was quitting. And, it was a very high performance position. It was very important. And I was okay with it because, I'm a professional. But to find out on the first day, after you've committed, you've joined, you don't have another job anymore, to find out on the first day that your boss is leaving is not the best. So anyway, it just hit me when you were talking about that, how it feels when you first start. I do think that is important because I never forgot that. For sure.
No, I actually had a strategic hire coming into one department, and I had another person who we had both arrived at really a decision that it was best for him to move on and find his next adventure. And so I actually very much so timed up the exits to happen well before new people were coming on, to protect the culture of the organization and allow that new person to have their space. And we, so in that environment, that was the best decision as management we could have made, was to try to make sure that that we paid attention to what we need to pay attention to there.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, in my case, this person, chose to leave on his own, and he was a really well-loved, person in the organization. There was actually we didn't have a manager for, I think, a year and a half. And honestly, for me, being pretty entrepreneurial, I kind of enjoyed it. I probably performed even better without the manager.
Yeah.
But it was still a real shocker to, come on and have that happen in the very first day. Anyway, before we got started talking, you mentioned that another thing that you've been working on is actually some studies about sort of workforce opportunities, and that you've talked with quite a number of companies. Is there anything about that you could share with us? 'Cause it sounds really exciting.
Sure. We believe, and we've found over the past several years that there's been a talent gap in our area. We have a lot of talent that's searching, a lot of employers that are searching, and we have so many people that are missing themselves in the night as they go passing by.
Yeah.
And so we have to be able to certainly attract organizations, attract talent to our area. We also have to grow the organizations that are here. The job market's changing. The disruption index recently produced by the Tennessee Department of one of the Tennessee departments estimates that some 50% or more of jobs that are only $20 an hour will be automated in the next 5 to 10 years. The other types of reports that are out there, show that the number of freelancers is going to rise by a very dramatic percentage in the job market as well. And more, we're finding that some 60% of jobs or more are going to require some post-secondary education than before. And if you look at demographics and where we are in our community and other communities where they are as well, there's looming and upcoming talent gaps with boomers that are retiring and with entry-level talent. And so some of the canaries in the coal mine type of indicators that we've looked at are percentages of 26 to 35 college-educated and above individuals in a job market, entry-level job opportunities. And we're developing talent scorecards for cities to help companies understand, workforce and education understand, and also be able to help job seekers understand where the best opportunities are. So we're rolling those out in the coming months. We're excited about that. But some of the basis of that work, we sat down with over 200 organizations working with an organization called GMAC, Greater Memphis Alliance for Competitive Workforce. And we were the lead on that to corral together over 200 employers to talk with them about their talent needs. And we heard a number of themes, some very specific to industries, about things that we really need to be teaching from a certification standpoint, upgrades that may be needed at educational institutions in terms of their software technology, to more soft type of recommendations that were surrendered around what some people term as soft skill training. I call it employability skills training more. I think soft is too soft. So we heard a variety of that. We also looked at demand projections and had some validation of those demand projections, from various sources over what types of jobs are going to be in demand and what types of jobs are considered growth jobs.
Yeah.
And we found a lot of things, but we also found that there's a lot of jobs that only require some certificates and only require perhaps an associate's that far outperform your traditional 4-year degree.
Oh, I bet.
So if you're a big fan of micro, dirty jobs, you want to go be a welder and you'd love to do that, and you can start at $70,000, $80,000 and making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and work almost where you please. I have a friend who, very dear to me, went through an associate's degree and various electrical certifications to be able to program pumps. And every pump in every factory needs to be programmed, and it's a specialized deal. And so he leads teams of people makes enough money where his spouse has the option not to work, and he can barely find electricians that make $80,000 a year to come and work with him.
Wow.
So there's a lot of things out there that people may not have thought about that they need to think about that are very rewarding, in-demand careers. Maybe you roll your sleeves up a little more in one versus the other, but they're very fulfilling, very stable, and virtually transferable between here and wherever you'd like to live.
Yeah, that's great. So when can we expect to see those results kind of published, or when are you going to kind of start coming out to share more?
I believe in the coming months, the final reports will start to come out on that. We're looking for innovative ways to deliver that. But we've also developed an application that's going to be out there, so people will be able to preview a job, look at a video of it, develop their own profile on their phone on an app about what their skill sets are, look at what those jobs pay, how many are in demand, what the postings are, and then be able to say, okay, well, based on my profile, I'd like to kind of, star these jobs to watch them. And when you do that, you get a list of all the educational provider certifications and how much they are and when they're offered, right at your fingertips in one place. So a person can be able to navigate some of these high demand, high career jobs opportunities. It's a great application called Memphis Works that's rolling out in the coming months as well.
Oh, that's really cool. That's cool. Well, so there's something else I've been wanting to ask you, which is about job offers in particular. So this is a big question because I talk a lot about negotiation. And, oftentimes as we're going through the negotiation process, say we get an offer, maybe we want a little more money or a little more vacation or something. Usually, often, the job offer is actually presented to us sort of by the HR person, right? And it can be a really uncomfortable process. I bet probably for them as well as for us, the job seeker. Do you have sort of any tips on how to effectively negotiate in that environment, and what's really happening behind the scenes? Like when you ask for more money and the HR person leaves, then what happens? Like, what don't we see? If you can share that with us.
Some organizations have a fairly well-structured compensation range system, and that job hiring manager and HR liaison have a range in which they can operate in upon approval, without approval. In other scenarios, if you're going over those thresholds and your requests, of where you'd like to be, that's got to go to some type of committee, compensation committee or something like that, to be able to be considered. And so you having as much understanding about what that job is worth in the area, what your level of experience really warrants, and being willing to take an opportunity, even if it was a little less than you thought. You need to be open to doing that, especially if they have high growth opportunities there. And so, in-demand occupations certainly demand higher starting wages. But if you're a person out there that's trying to get your foot in the door on something, you may not have, certainly as much negotiating room, as a person who's seasoned, has a track record, and is bringing something to the organization.
No, I totally agree.
So, I had a person recently we were hiring, and I offered, one number. She came in around 8,000 or 9,000 annual more, and we settled somewhere in the middle. It was worth it for me. I knew that there would be probably some level of negotiation in it, and had that in the expectations coming into it. So as an employer, I would guess, or do you think most employers, it seems like, don't start out with the very first highest number they're going to give you? It depends on their compensation philosophy.
Okay.
There are some organizations that, a good organization, if they screen well, they want to know what your range is. And if you're not willing to say that, you're probably not going to make it through a lot of thresholds and organizations to get to the next level. That person's not been well screened to do that. If that's, if they get to the hiring manager and HR's offered these 3 resumes and this person wants 30% more than is budgeted, that was a screening problem. That should have been screened, before they got there. And so. For organizations, there's some out there. We've got one we work with on a compensation and benefits basis, and their philosophy is if they go home to their spouse, he or she goes home to their spouse and says, "I'm thinking about leaving this company." They want them to look them in the eye and says, "Are you crazy?" The benefits they have are out of the water. Like they buy the best benefit you can buy with no deductibles and everything else for healthcare, and they pay 100% of it. That everything in the break room you're not allowed to pay for. the compensation philosophy is to pay more than the market.
Oh, that's nice.
Their compensation philosophy is to offer more, but at the end of the day, they expect a lot.
Yeah,
And
they would expect
have
a lot
work
for that.
flexibility where people can literally be at home and be on a robot roving around the office. I mean, it's a very progressive workplace to do that. They have high expectations, high growth, and they're in an industry that has the type of margins to do that. But his comp philosophy for this organization is all about that. Other people, it's like, well, we've got all these temporary positions in these spaces. We're having problems with this and this over here. We've got these other people over here that are permanent. We're not doing bad over there. So what's the wage difference in these two? He said, well, we get this and this, but we can the temps, we only pay them, $8 or $9 an hour. I said, well, you're probably going to have a lot of turnover at $8 or $9 an hour.
That's true, yeah.
You've got transportation problems. You've got all kinds of things that people are, if you decide to stay at that rate. So, it really depends on the job and the position, and you have a lot of approaches.
That makes sense. So are there certain industries where it's easier or harder to negotiate? My perception has been that, say, for like a government position, that they're going to have less flexibility because the range for what they pay is pretty well set. It's publicly usually published versus a big company, like a big corporation, they might have more flexibility. Would you agree with that? Or are there certain industries where it would be easier or harder to negotiate?
In high demand industries, your supply and demand certainly affects that greatly.
Yeah.
The culture in that industry over how their wage structures are built and set, and succession is important to that too. If you have a highly unionized environment where there's prescriptive steps over how people enter and those kind of things, you need to be aware of that before trying to negotiate, because you'll just negotiate yourself straight out of a job in that one.
Right.
I have turned away individuals and let people go that had different negotiating styles than I appreciated in terms of the way in which they went about, doing that. So that's just as important. Is the way that you propose and talk through things and your research and things like that too.
Yeah, it's definitely not a battle. It's better to ask on the front end when you're first working for a company than I've seen people who are already working there and they show up and start demanding more money for the same job, and that's certainly not something that's going to sit well with an employer.
No.
Well, just another question on this. So a lot of people have fear around negotiation, and one question they have is it normal? Do other people negotiate? Like, is this really something that happens? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, the other question they have is, what if the employer says no? Are they going to take the offer away from me? Like, am I at risk for losing the offer if I ask for more money? And what is your perspective on that?
I think that it depends on the level of the organization you're entering at, and your research need to be data-driven and focused. This is what I've found. This is where my experience is.
Mm-hmm.
I value myself at here. This is where I'm looking at, and so doing it in a respectful way. Always have to do that. You might run into organizations that just don't.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to negotiate on the deal. Their offers are their offers, and they may have trouble getting talent that way some days, and some days not. I had one organization we worked with, and he basically told all his people, look, I pay you what I pay you because that's what it's worth, the organization. You agreed to take the job for that, so I don't want to hear about anything else other than what you agreed to take the job at. We will have cost of living. We'll have bonuses. We're going to have all kinds of things for people to have incentive compensation. But when it comes to base pay negotiations, this is what is prescribed, and this is where we're at. And if it's not going to work for you, then this isn't for you, And so, so there's, depending on the culture of the organization, you need to kind of, whatever you can find out about that is important to find out.
Yeah, the thing I think that you said that was really important is if this doesn't work for you. And I think oftentimes, even if the company doesn't go up, when you ask for more, oftentimes they're not going to necessarily rescind an offer unless you really act like a jerk. Chances are good they may say, I'm sorry, we can't do more, but would you still like this offer, or not? So, another question is, you are an entrepreneur. We talked about that from the beginning, and I know that you get approached a lot. People look at you as sort of a mentor or someone for, to seek out advice. And I'm sure that people come to you and say, Austin, I'm thinking, should I go into business for myself or should I take a full-time job? And when you get approached with that question, what advice do you have for someone that's kind of struggling?
Well, I think more people will approach that question as much in the sense of, being a freelancer for hire more than ever, as opposed to an enterprise business. If you want to go that route, you need to do your homework. It's not something that is just stepped into lightly. You have to understand that if you're going to go and be an entrepreneur, you have to understand the art of negotiation, the art of business models, the art of cash flow management. You have to understand that you're going to have some intestinal fortitude to weather what's coming. If you decide to start adding payroll on, it gets pretty real when you're there to make payroll and making sure cash is there, and starting out with slim margins and growing in such a way. Making the right hires in those kind of environments is very, very important. So you're turning yourself into a hiring manager. You're turning yourself into a person that might start to hire others. But one of the biggest things I think that people have to switch in their own heads that people can't seem to do is that as an entrepreneur, you're only worth as much as the market's willing to pay for that service and your ability to perform. You cannot confuse efforts with results. You can work for 40 hours a week and make absolutely no money. Mm-hmm. You can work 40 hours a week and lose a whole lot of money. You can decide to invest $4,000 on a potential project that might pay you $500,000 and not get it. You can invest $2,000 on one that you weren't sure about, and it could produce 3 times more than you ever thought. And the ups and downs and the risks and rewards that come with that provide for you to make more upside than you thought you could. But also there's downside of that, and without discipline and understanding that your work ethic is going to have to multiply times 2 or 3, your mindset's going to have to multiply times 2 or 3, and you're going to have to value your time into several buckets and be able to manage that, then you're not going to be successful. And so, my buckets are green time, yellow, and red time. Green time, there are times when I'm making dollars and negotiating or doing something that's contributing to the bottom line of the organization. Yellow time is when I'm preparing to do green time, and red time is downtime or planning time, with either whether it be personal or as the organization. And so the percentage of my time I spend on a weekly basis and how I manage that and categorize that well properly is really depends on how well I do.
That's good advice. And I think the thing I really took away from what you were saying is I think it takes a lot of fortitude to be an entrepreneur. You really have to, it's harder, I think, than sometimes we picture. I know when I came out of grad school, I was self-employed for a while, and I think it was harder than I anticipated, which was, over 10 years ago. It was definitely, just trying to make the rent every month was a struggle. So I think you really have to be prepared for that kind of stuff before you go down that path, certainly. Well, speaking of entrepreneurship, you actually own a restaurant as well here in Memphis, which I really like, called Owen Brennan's. And as sort of my last question, I'm really curious, these are 2 very different industries that you're in. Can you share with us a little bit about what the differences are between sort of the restaurant industry and the HR industry from your perspective?
Well, sure. My organization is comprised an HR services and organization that is consultative based around selling consulting services to organizations and solving problems for companies. My HR technology company is around technology and platform solutions and building out scalable tech solutions to solve problems for customers that complement our HR practice. And Owen Brennan's is its own, certainly, entity over there. You have entity that now is 26 years in business, is considered one of the most successful restaurants in the city in terms of reputation, I think. We do a great job. Best Sunday brunch for more than 15 or 20 years now. Best business power lunch. We often get those type of accolades as well. Mm-hmm. But more on our bottom line, we grow at a very high percentage per year. We have had very steady growth and very healthy margins for a restaurant business. And that's been done by a lot of work, and that work looks different. The managing in a restaurant environment, the things you're managing are different. Some people say the worst thing ever invented was the back door, because there's food that walks out all the time. Everything you have on your shelves is perishable or can be drank, by staff or other people. And so you have, all of these things that manage, as well as certainly, all of the aspects of logistics and operations of managing and keeping a place open and looking really top notch all the time, and the maintenance that goes with that. Machines up and running, so you have assembly line systems in the backs. People don't realize that the restaurant business is probably one of the most complex businesses out there and has a high failure rate because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, if we are interested to learn more about your company, HRO Partners, where can we go? Where are you on the web?
HRO-partners.com. You can look us up on Facebook at HRO Partners for our Twitter handle. My personal handle is at @JAustinBaker. And we'd love to connect with you any of those ways. I'm certainly on LinkedIn as well. You can find me under Austin Baker. So we have a lot of customer testimonials. We have some white paper downloads on various best practice things that they can grab. Our blog's about to go be transferred over to there as well. And if you want to sign up for our newsletter, I send out on a monthly basis my Baker's Dozen, 13 tips to think differently about a variety of things, some related to some HR and some even around quantum physics. So it's interesting stuff. So I hope you check it out.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining me today, Austin. This has been great. I think honestly, even if you're not interested to work in the HR space, this kind of information that you provide on your website is helpful to anybody that's a job seeker. It just kind of gives you sort of an insider point of view. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And if you have any questions that you'd like me to cover on an upcoming episode, you can email me at angela@copelandcoaching.com. You can also send me questions via Twitter. I'm at Copeland Coach, and on Facebook, I'm Copeland Coaching. Don't forget to help me out, subscribe on iTunes, and leave me a review.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.